In 2020, Republican Representative Nancy Mace of South Carolina's 1st Congressional District edged out Democratic incumbent Representative Joe Cunningham, the first Democrat to flip a House seat in South Carolina in 30 years. Mace won by just 5,400 votes, or 1%. Then 2 years ago, following redistricting, Mace won re-election by 14%. Since then, she was critical of Trump following the January 6, 2021 MAGA-inspired attack on the U.S. Capitol. She's endorsed Trump despite the many criminal charges against him and despite his conviction for sexually abusing writer E. Jean Carroll in the 1990s. Now, attorney Mac DeFord is one of 2 Democrats running in the primary June 11 for the chance to oppose Mace in November. His opponent in the primary is business executive Michael Moore. And we're pleased to have DeFord with us on the Lean to the Left podcast today. Welcome, Mac.
Hey, Bob. It's great to be here. Thank you.
Last month, a federal court ruled that the South Carolina elections will be held under a map already deemed unconstitutional and discriminatory against black voters by the same 3-judge panel that found the state used race as a proxy for partisan affiliation, which is a violation of the Constitution, the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. Mac, what are your thoughts about that?
Bob, as Martin Luther King once said, justice delayed is justice denied. And the U.S. Supreme Court has had plenty of time to evaluate this case. They heard oral arguments on October the 11th. I was actually up in D.C. I got in and was actually able to observe oral arguments in person. And I just think it's blatantly ridiculous as to how long this has taken. I think it's a huge disservice and an injustice that we're going to be running under the current lines. That being said, while I am disappointed and dismayed that the injustice will not be addressed by the U.S. Supreme Court in time, we were preparing for this, and our campaign is really centered around the current lines. We have the ability to adjust if necessary, but we have been running with the understanding that we would probably be running under the current lines.
Is it really a racial issue, do you think, that's going on here?
100%. If you look at the case, and if you look at it from the 30,000-foot view, the Republican-led state legislator wanted to take all of Berkeley and Beaufort counties into the 1st Congressional District because they figured that those are better performing Republican counties. And so in doing so, they then looked to the Charleston County portion, and they decided that their own studies told them essentially that they had to have an African-American population in the Charleston County portion of about 17% in order to get the Republican tilt that they were after. Their own studies showed that was the only way they could get that Republican tilt, and they ended up reducing the African-American population down to roughly 17.4 or 5%, somewhere around there, but effectively cutting 30,000 African-Americans out of the 1st district. The state's defense is basically, yes, we had access to that, those studies that we commissioned, but we didn't use race in determining the lines. And I think that when your own studies say that the only way you can achieve a result is by cutting out certain groups of voters based on the color of their skin, and then you actually do that, it's a no-brainer.
Okay. Now, you're an attorney. You spent some time in the Coast Guard as a police officer, and you've worked for a software company. You've served as an attorney for Mount Pleasant and Hilton Head Island. If you should win the election, how would these experiences inform your service in the House?
I think in many different ways. My time in the Coast Guard, I was, yes, a Coast Guard police officer in Baltimore, Maryland. I was also a federal law enforcement officer at Coast Guard Station Charleston. I'm the only candidate in this entire race on both sides that's ever defended a border, our maritime borders. And part of my job was to board the container ships coming into the port, search them for drugs and other illegal contraband, as well as enforcing our nation's immigration laws. So I've been on the front lines of that, and I understand what's at stake there. Also enforcing our environmental laws on the water, which is another thing that the Coast Guard does that I had direct responsibility for as a boarding officer. And then I would also say my time working for local government as an attorney, I was the #2 attorney for the town of Mount Pleasant. and I was the general counsel for the town of Hilton Head Island. So I've worked on a lot of the issues that we have issues with now that we need help with from our congressional representative, whether that's affordable housing, where I'm actively working on behalf of the town of Hilton Head Island to bring a workforce housing solution to the island right now. I've worked on road and bridge projects. I've crafted and advised on environmental legislation. And I've actually gone to bat against the federal government to secure federal funds for projects like beach renourishment, which are so critical to protecting our environment, but also to controlling flooding in the region.
Yeah, that's really important, especially for your district. And that also brings up the thought about flooding and flood control and abatement and all of that. That's a big deal for you too, right?
Absolutely. We are in a district. Downtown Charleston is not in the district because of the way they've gerrymandered this district. But we have places in the district that at a high tide and there's a full moon, the streets may flood. So we have to really look at how can our natural environment protect us from flooding, which is when I talk about beach renourishment and marsh restoration projects. Our
Right.
marshes have such a critical role in controlling flooding and also to cleaning our waterways, but also making sure that we're investing in infrastructure to mitigate flooding, both from storms, but also the flooding that we see on a more regular basis.
Yeah, Mac, I was just thinking that under the Biden administration, we've got this new infrastructure package that was passed. Will any of that help with what you're trying to do there in your district?
Absolutely. The bipartisan infrastructure bill was a tremendous accomplishment uh, for the Biden-Harris administration. Unfortunately, our congressional representative, the incumbent Nancy Mace, voted no for that bill, although she took credit for it when the money came in.
That's
Um,
typical, isn't it?
yeah, and I think that's really disingenuous. She claims that she would have fought for more funding. She never proposed that as an amendment when the bill was being debated.
Yeah.
Anyone can point out a problem, but you have to bring forward a solution if you're serving up there in Congress. But yeah, absolutely. We have bridges in the district that need to be replaced.
Mhm.
We have, I think about the 278 bridge that gets you to Hilton Head. That needs to be replaced. I have actually worked on that project for the town of Hilton Head Island, working with the counterparts at the Department of Transportation, the Federal Highway Administration, and Beaufort County. But we have other bridges that need to be replaced. And let's face it, here in South Carolina, we're not known for the quality of our roadways. And we have a lot of roads that need a lot of updating and
Mhm.
investment in our district.
All right. You brought up Congresswoman Mace. What are your thoughts about her supporting Trump after she criticized him for the January 6th insurrection?
Unfortunately, I'm not surprised that she is supporting Donald Trump.
Hmm.
I think it's ironic that Donald Trump endorsed her opponent last year, and Nikki Haley endorsed Nancy Mace I'm sorry, not last year, but last cycle. And
Hmm.
then now we have Donald Trump endorsing Nancy Mace and Nancy Mace endorsing Donald Trump. I've always thought Nancy Mace is going to do what's best for her and not best for the low country, not best for the people that she represents, which I think is evidenced by the fact that this is the only congressional district in South Carolina that rejected Donald Trump in the Republican presidential primary. Every single other district voted for Donald Trump in the Republican primary. That is a significant point to make to voters in this election.
So if you were to win, what would it take?
First and foremost, we have to get Democrats or people that are likely to vote Democrat out to vote, get them energized to vote. And so
Right.
I filed to run with the FEC last year, last April, actually. And we've been at it since around mid-April and May.
Mhm.
So we've been going out, especially in the communities that have been left behind, communities that really need that level of investment that they just have been totally neglected. But also, you absolutely need crossover support. So I have intentionally reached out to your moderate Republicans and targeting those voters that probably voted for Nikki Haley, for example,
Mhm.
in the presidential primary. And we've received a lot of support not just people saying, I'm not going to support Nancy Mace or I'm done with Nancy Mace, but people that are, unsolicited, they are emailing and sending letters of support to our campaign, voicing their support. They're also sending in monetary contributions, donations to our campaign. And we've received donations from former Nancy Mace donors as well. I think those are all significant indications that we could flip the House this year. But I think it's also a sign that people are looking for a representative that's not going to just toe the party line. They're looking for someone that is actually in tune to what's going on here in the district and that is actually going to take an active role in addressing the challenges that we face.
Mac, what would be your priorities for congressional action in the next couple of years if you manage to pull this out?
The first thing that I think Congress must do, the 119th Congress, when it is sworn in January, is codify Roe v. Wade. And I believe that morally, we should not be controlling other people's bodies, women's decisions to make and controlling their pathhood to motherhood. It's also an issue that my family was personally impacted by. In 1960, my grandmother was 31 years old and she was the mother of eight. She was the wife of a bridge welder and they were Catholic. And when she became pregnant with her ninth child, her husband fell and could no longer work. And they really just could not financially afford to bring on another child. They were living in a small kind of row house in Wilmington, Delaware, 3 bedroom with 8 kids and one bathroom.
Wow.
And so they could not bring on a ninth child given their circumstances. And ultimately, my grandmother made the decision to seek an abortion. But in 1960, she couldn't get a safe legal procedure. So she obtained a backroom procedure. And unfortunately, she died 2 weeks later on February 5th, 1960.
Oh.
And if that's not bad enough that a young woman, I'm 35 years old, she was 4 years younger than I am now, but a father or a husband lost his wife. Eight children lost their mother. My mother was 5.5 years old at the time, and her death, and because of my grandfather's disability, the family unit was broken up by the state, and my mother was sent into a broken foster care system where she suffered abuse for several years until she was finally adopted. I don't take seriously the politicians up in Columbia and other state houses across the country that have enacted these extreme abortion bans that say that they're pro-life, but they are the same. This is the same mentality that attributed to my grandmother's death, it attributed to my grandfather losing his wife, and it attributed to my family being broken up. And it changed the entire trajectory.
You do have some personal reasons to be concerned about that. That's for sure. Now, what else besides Roe v. Wade would be on your hit parade that you would want to deal with?
Yeah, I feel very strongly, and we talked about it a little bit earlier, but the investment in our infrastructure is critical right now because the thing with infrastructure is that it takes a long time to implement, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you have to secure the funding. We even have projects that are approved, but they're not funded. But it's absolutely critical that you secure the funding. It does take time, so we really don't have any time to waste. When it comes to affordable housing, for example, my wife and I, we live in Mount Pleasant. We're both lawyers. If we were to sell our townhome, we would have a difficult time finding a place to live in Mount Pleasant because of how unaffordable it has become. We have, and that's not unique to Mount Pleasant. That's all over the first district. And it's not even just unique to the first district. It's all over the state. And that impacts everyone, whether or not you are wealthy. If you can't afford to live where you work and work where you live, that impacts services that are being delivered, emergency services. It impacts the economy. It impacts the small business owners. And I absolutely think that we have to invest in affordable housing in terms of infrastructure. And then again, making sure that our transit infrastructure is resilient against climate change, but also the storms that we see, flooding, but also that we have public transit. I think that as this region continues to grow, we have to think about how many vehicles are on the roadways and are there public transportation solutions that can be implemented that can alleviate the congestion that we see all throughout the Low Country.
Now, your district is dependent on tourism, certainly sensitive to climate issues, which you've mentioned. And you mentioned the need for affordable housing. How would you deal with these issues and meet those needs, Mac, if you manage to win?
Yeah, I think that we have to look at the economy of the region. And you're absolutely right. This is a big tourism economy here in the Low Country. We also, though, have communities that support other types of industries. Right up the road, we have Boeing, and we have employees from Boeing or Volvo or Mercedes-Benz, where they're making the Sprinter vans. We have military bases. We have the Air Force, the Navy, the Marines down in Beaufort. And
Mhm.
in over the next 5 or so years, the Coast Guard base here in Charleston is poised to become the largest U.S. Coast Guard installation in the entire United States. And so we have to have places for these people to live. And so I think making sure that housing needs are being addressed, it's not just rental housing units, but it's also homes for ownership. A big contributor to the skyrocketing home prices is the fact that you have these big corporations that are buying up the housing stock. And they are artificially inflating the prices when they flip the homes, they rent them out, and then they sell them at an inflated price. And so I'm a big proponent that because they are in effect causing or helping to cause this crisis with affordability, that they should be paying into a housing trust to allow certain families to be able to draw from to put down as a down payment for housing, for home ownership.
That's a creative idea, one that I've not heard before. Is that?
I will not take credit in its novelty, but I will say that it's something that hasn't taken a lot of traction. But there are some multi-county housing trust funds that have been established that counties and municipalities will pitch into.
Mhm.
But I do think that rather than expecting just these counties and municipalities, which ultimately are the taxpayers, to
Mhm.
be paying for this, that we need to hold these corporations accountable that are causing this by artificially inflating the market. And that's not to say that we don't want business to be profitable, but you are, I'm saying you as in these corporations, you are causing part of the problem, if not a lot of the problem. And
Mhm.
therefore you should pay into a trust so that people can draw from that to make a down payment for a home. Because for most of us, for me, my most valuable asset financially is my home. And that's the way it is for many people. So it's about providing rental solutions, but also home ownership solutions as well when it comes to affordable housing.
Let's talk a little bit about healthcare and healthcare accessibility and affordability.
Yeah, absolutely. A huge proponent and advocate that healthcare is or it ought to be a universal basic right. I don't think that in the United States that it's acceptable that you have some people that can afford healthcare and others who can't, and those who can't will live less healthier lives and also may not be able to afford to get the treatments that they need to live a quality life.
Mm.
Unfortunately, South Carolina is a state where the state legislator refused to expand Medicaid.
Yep.
That impacts well over 100,000 individuals here in South Carolina that could be receiving health care through Medicaid expansion. And so I think that is very unfortunate. In terms of accessibility, I can tell you I've worked on projects down in Beaufort County, for example, where we're trying to bring healthcare facilities to areas that have shortages of healthcare workers. And we have a lot of rural communities in the first congressional district. And so they also need some attention when it comes to being able to access healthcare, whether that is through transportation solutions to get them to and from their doctor's appointments,
Mhm.
through the continued investment of broadband internet so that they can access telehealth services, and then actually having healthcare facilities in their communities, whether that's through satellite offices or just more hospitals in general. And also being able to recruit and retain healthcare workers. It goes to the affordable housing part too. There are healthcare providers that, for example, down on Hilton Head, they have a huge shortage at the hospital down there. There's only one hospital on the island,
Okay.
and they cannot recruit nurses to start at $85,000 a year because they cannot afford to live on the island or even in that general region. And they can get a comparable job somewhere else and be able to live somewhere more affordable elsewhere. That's another part of it to being able to support accessibility is through providing housing. But then also, as we've seen with the current administration with capping the prices of insulin, I think that we need to continue to allow the federal government to negotiate prescription drug rates.
Mhm.
One of the biggest, or I shouldn't say the biggest, but one significant driver between prescription drug prices is you have these pharmacy benefit managers
Yeah.
that are negotiating these prices for prescriptions, but in many times these PBMs are actually owned by the insurance companies. So you have the insurance companies negotiating these prices, and really through this middleman, the pharmacy benefits managers, and it's really not a good situation for the end user being the patient.
A little bit of a conflict of interest there, right?
100%.
Okay. How do you plan to engage with and represent underrepresented or marginalized groups in your district?
I think there are definitely some initiatives that can be taken to help underrepresented and marginalized citizens in our district.
Mhm.
One big issue that I have had some experience working on is heirs property. You have a lot of African American families that their descendants were formerly enslaved people. And after the Civil War, when the Union Army came in and basically, gave the land to the former slaves, there was no documentation of this. And
Okay.
so over time, that has really caused a problem where now you have maybe a family's elder who is the land's been in their family for ever since the Civil War, and they pass away, and you can't identify easily who all may have an interest in that land. And so it
Okay.
really ties up a lot of problems for these families. And it's very costly to try to expect them to have to pay for this out of pocket to find a lawyer to navigate that process. It can be quite costly. So one of the things I worked on was down in Hilton Head to establish a community development corporation. It's called the Gullah Geechee Historic Neighborhoods Community Development Corporation,
Okay.
and we were able to obtain $5 million in seed funding, and what it is designed to do is promote Gullah Geechee entrepreneurship, offer other programs of that sort, but it also is intended to provide legal resources or funding for legal resources for those communities that are dealing with heirs property. That's, I think, a big way. Another is you have a lot of what are referred to as donut holes in South Carolina, where you have an area within a county or within a municipality that's not actually in the municipality. It's still technically in the county. For
Mhm.
example, if you've ever been in a community or for any of your listeners live in a community where your neighbor may use county trash, but you have the city's trash. Those are the donut holes I'm talking about. And the problem there for some communities is that they don't have the ability to hook up to sewage. So they're using septic tanks.
Okay.
And that can be very harmful for the environment because if they are not well maintained, as we've seen in certain waterways like Shem Creek and Mount Pleasant,
Mhm.
can be really bad for the environment. So also providing resources to make sure that we're upgrading folks so that they can get off septic tanks and get connected to sewer and also get connected to clean water. I have visited communities here in this district that they tell me they don't have access to clean water. They cannot drink the water that comes out of their tap. That is unacceptable. That should not be the case here in 2024 in the United States. And so
Why is that, Mac? Why is it?
a lack of infrastructure to and clean water treatment plants in certain areas.
Okay.
So this particular area is in northern Berkeley County that I
Mhm.
went to, and yeah, they don't drink their water that comes out of their tap, is what they're telling me there. They have other issues like roads, paved roads that turn into dirt roads, and they're just unfinished. And just because you're a rural community doesn't mean that you shouldn't get the same level of basic investment that other communities get.
Are there broadband issues also for those folks?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Broadband issues, cell coverage. That is one thing that the Biden administration has been successful in, and they are actively implementing that, is bringing broadband to all of South Carolina. It's still being implemented, but
Mhm.
we need to continue in that, because today's day and age, if you don't have access to the internet, you are left out of society. You can work from home now on the internet. You can access healthcare services through telehealth. You can take classes. So it is so important for people to be connected to the internet. And if you have communities that are not, you're really leaving them out of our society.
Yeah. All right. So a lot of the folks that you would represent would be Social Security recipients and Medicare beneficiaries, correct?
Yes.
What are your thoughts about the efforts by some Republicans and I guess Trump to either cut benefits or raise the retirement age? What are your thoughts about that? I know that at some point something has to happen in order to avoid the automatic, I don't know, is it 20% cut that will happen in several
Mhm.
years if the trust fund isn't solidified? But what's your idea about that?
Look, I believe that Social Security, Medicare, those are programs that those are promised to us,
Okay.
right? The government says you're gonna pay into Social Security, you're gonna pay into Medicare, and in
Yep.
return, when you hit a certain age, you're gonna have that benefit.
Yep.
And so to turn around and say, now we're going to talk about cutting it, which they do all the time,
Yep.
that's just a breach of the pact of
Yep.
government that we have here is between
Yep.
society and forming government. And they say that cutting social programs like this that are intended to help people is how we can continue to pay for certain things. And I
Yeah.
just think that's a total sham. Look, there is no reason why somebody making 160 some thousand dollars a year should be paying the same amount into Social Security that a billionaire is.
Yeah.
So I think that we need to move the cap
Hmm.
a lot. And it's
Hmm.
not to say that we need to, outrageously tax the ultra wealthy. I have no issue with someone who, enjoys the fruits of their labor, but they should be paying their fair share. And then, when it comes to Medicare, I mean, look, we are more than halfway through the retirement age of the baby boomer cohort generation. The current financial structure underpinning Medicare right now is not equipped to deal with a doubling essentially of that population.
Yeah.
And so we have to get really serious about how we're going to continue to fund it. And I think that's going to take some pretty massive legislative actions to buy us even just another 20 or 30 years. But again, we have to start now. And I think that a lot of some of the savings could be in fraud, waste, and abuse.
Mm.
There is nearly $1 trillion a year lost to fraud, waste, and abuse. A lot of that, I think, talk about AI, and that's a whole different topic in and of itself. But
Yeah, for sure.
artificial intelligence could be a very powerful tool in reducing fraud, waste, and abuse, as well as streamlining different administrative processes and whatnot. We have to be very careful on how AI is further developed and integrated into our society. But I think that's an investment worth making, because if we can reduce the cost in healthcare, we can figure out more targeted ways in which we're sending that money, and it's not just being thrown away when we can save it.
Yeah. Okay. Now, another hot button issue that is currently at the heart of the presidential campaign is immigration. And it's been that since before Trump. And it was exacerbated, I think, by his determination to build that wall and his hateful rhetoric against brown people. What are your thoughts about that general topic about immigration and what needs to be done? Also, I think the question would need to include the idea of busing undocumented immigrants into certain areas. The Republicans are now claiming that's happening right here in South Carolina. What's your, it's a big question, but what are your thoughts about that, Mac?
First and foremost, the image, in my opinion, of America is not a giant wall.
Yeah.
It's the Statue of Liberty.
Okay.
This is not a country. I mean, look, when I think about walls, I think about things like the Berlin Wall that went up and what
Yeah.
that was a symbol of oppression, of distress. And the United States fought through, within the Cold War to bring that wall down.
Yeah.
Um, and so we should not be talking about building a wall as the same as we should not be anti-immigration. We are a nation of immigrants. Most of us are we are descendants of immigrants.
Yeah.
So that is, I think, something, that sort of mentality that sort of the ultra right has pushed, that we should be shut the border down.
Right.
It's one thing to say you want to have legal immigration, you want to have a secure border. I support a secure border. I'm the only candidate in this race who has defended a border, our maritime borders. And I know exactly the dangers that illegal immigration poses, not just to us here in the United States in terms of the associated activities that go on with illegal immigration, drug proliferation, but also how dangerous it is for the individuals that are trying to come to the United States, many of whom don't make it, especially when they're trying to come over through our maritime borders. We can't even be very accurate to say how many perish on their journey here because they're in makeshift vessels that you wouldn't even want to take into a retention pond, let alone
Yeah.
the ocean.
Yeah.
And so I think that, look, we do need to secure our border and make sure that people are coming in through lawful ways. But I also think that, back to something that actually President Eisenhower once said, that the best investment we can make is in foreign economies. There's a reason people are trying to come to the United States in troves. They're not leaving their homes in Mexico and South America because they have a perfect or a wonderful situation.
Yeah.
They are leaving very dangerous, very deteriorating circumstances to come here to try to make a better living. And I think that we need to find ways to work with our neighbors on the other side of the border to see how the global community can help their economies, but also to work with them to make sure that they are also not allowing people to cross their borders to just come here in large troves illegally. But at the same time, for those people that want to come here to contribute to our society, they want to come and have a shot at the American dream. I'm all for that. When we look at the Francis Scott Key Bridge, when I was in the Coast Guard, the Coast Guard base I was the police officer at was basically right at the base of that bridge. All of the individuals who died on the bridge, they were
Mhm.
all immigrants.
Yeah.
They were all working on the bridge.
Yeah.
They were doing jobs that other people were not doing. And all this talk about we're gonna deport tens of millions of immigrants, we're gonna tear families apart. These are human beings at the end of the day. And if we remove all the political layers of all this and we look at these, for the most part, immigrants that are here, they just want to work. They're contributing to our society. They're doing jobs that a lot of us don't want to do. And why are we trying to punish that? Yes, have a secure border, get serious about stopping the proliferation of drugs into our country and also the proliferation of guns from our country to Mexico and to South America, but also do so in a way that's not going to distort the very image of America being the Statue of Liberty. Because if we go the other direction and build the wall, I think we'll become a tyrannical nation.
I think that immigration is an example of why so many people are frustrated with Congress and Congress's inability to deal with issues like that. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. You had Senator Langford and a group of senators proposed a bipartisan, albeit very conservative, border
Mhm.
security bill. And look, would it have solved all of the problems? No. But would it have helped significantly? Probably.
Mhm.
And so, what really aggravates me about how everything unfolded with that, and Donald Trump basically telling the House, absolutely do not go for this bill. We
Right.
don't want to give Joe Biden a win in a presidential election year.
Yeah.
And you had Nancy Mace jumping on that bandwagon. And my problem with that is if you don't like something about the bill, call it out
Hmm.
specifically
Hmm.
and propose an alternative.
Okay.
Because anyone can point out a problem,
Sure.
but your job is to legislate and to find solutions to problems. So if you're unhappy with something that was in the bill, propose an alternative. Don't just kill it. I share the frustration that many people have, and this is a can that's been kicked back and forth. And look, I won't be coy here. I hold my own party, Democrats, accountable just as much. This should have been addressed at the beginning of Joe Biden's term,
Yeah, sure.
and we're dealing with it now.
Yeah.
I think that more could have been done, but we are where we are now. And at the end of the day, Republicans had an opportunity to do something meaningful when it came to border security, and they ultimately decided not to, and they chose party politics over serving the American people.
Why did you're 35 years old, you told me, right?
That's right.
So you're a young lawyer, you got a family. You got a family, right?
I do. Yes.
Yeah, including two dogs, two yellow
Yes.
labs, which I want to point out because they're great dogs. Okay. Why did you decide to do this? Why did you decide that you're going to take time, effort, money, energy out of your life and run for Congress when so many people are fed up and leaving?
Yeah, I am fed up with Congress, and I would say that's why I want to go in because
Oh, you're fed
I,
up,
I
so you want to go in because you're fed up.
I'm fed up with the level of unseriousness that we see up there. I see people going into Congress that they really have selfish pursuits that they're after.
Right,
And that is not what the job is about. I've been in public service really since I graduated high school when I enlisted in the US Coast Guard.
right,
And to me, being in public service is about serving the greater good. It's not about how can I, elevate my national image on TV,
right.
or how can I get more likes on Twitter or something like that.
Hmm.
Your measure of success ought to be, how many people can afford to live in their communities now? How many people are still struggling? Do we have communities in the first district that lack access to clean water? I
Right.
doubt Nancy Mace has been up there to northern Berkeley County in a while to even meet with these community leaders.
Uh-huh.
And so it's that level of unseriousness that really concerns me. As a member of Congress, you have a small share of the national responsibility in determining the course that our country is going to move in. But
Hmm.
then you have a very significant uh, amount of responsibility and influence over your local district. And so I'm concerned both by how Nancy Mace how she has treated her small share of the national responsibility,
Hmm.
voting against funding for Ukraine, voting against women's rights, and not just on the abortion issue, but on equal pay, which remains a critical issue in this country. She's voted against the Paycheck Fairness Act, which would have helped to narrow the pay inequality gap that exists in our country, but also to her inattention here in the Low Country. She's really done very little for us here, and we need something serious. And then I would just say too quickly, again, at 35, I'm a millennial. My generation is represented by only 12% in the House of Representatives.
True.
So we don't need all the seats at the table, but I think we can have a few more seats at the table
Hmm.
to bring fresh perspectives and ideas and to complement the experienced members that are up there that have been doing it for a while to have that intersection of wisdom and new energy.
Have you given any thought, Mac, to how long you would stay there and what you would do after that?
I have no idea what I would do after that, but I can tell you that I do not want to make a career out of being a US congressman. I am a supporter of term limits. I don't know what those term limits would look like, but I do think that it's not good for the country when you have these sort of
Source.
long-serving political dynasties. They become more like royalty than they are public servants. And I think that's bad. But I think the measure of success would be, or how long I'd want to stay is I want to codify Roe v. Wade. I
Hmm.
want to make sure that our district has access to affordable housing. I want to reaffirm our country's standing on the world stage and make sure that our allies know that we're going to be there for them and that we're not going to pull out of NATO. I want to be there to make sure that if Donald Trump is reelected, that if we can flip the House, that the House of Representatives and hopefully we keep the Senate, that the United States Congress as a whole will be a bulwark of defense against Donald Trump. If I can accomplish those things and address the needs of the Low Country and faithfully carry out my small share of the national responsibility in a few terms or so, I think I will have done my job.
Okay. Thank you, Mac. Have you got anything else that you'd like to add?
No, I think that's it, Bob. I really
Okay.
appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you. I enjoyed talking to you. Hey, guys, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this Lean to the Left video and you found it interesting and informative. Please visit on a regular basis and check out our interviews with guests on topics that focus on progressive politics and the important social issues of our time. Now, our interview shows stream on Mondays with special episodes on Thursdays. And you can check out upcoming shows, guests, and topics at podcast.leantotheleft.net. Subscribe to our audio version there and to our video shows here at YouTube. And follow us on social media. Facebook at Bob Gaddy and the Lean to the Left podcast. Now, it's two. Bob Gaddy is one Facebook page, and the Lean to the Left podcast is a second Facebook page. Twitter at Lean to the Left 1. Instagram at Lean to the Left 1, TikTok at Lean to the Left, LinkedIn at Bob Gaddy, and YouTube at Lean to the Left. Now, I hope you'll support Lean to the Left as well so we can keep things going. Just click on the Donate tab at the top of the leantotheleft.net homepage and contribute by buying me a cup of coffee. That'll really help and would be much, much, much appreciated. Now, this is Bob Gaddy signing off for Lean to the Left. Thanks for sharing your time with us.